As my excitement for a film goes up, so does my nervousness, because there's the potential that as that hype goes up, so does the potential to be disappointed, and the amount of letdown that you're going to experience increases alongside it. However, I did not let this stop me from continuing to get excited to go see Spider-Man No Way Home. Not only was this going to be the first MCU film that I took my sons to, but I was very intrigued to see where the franchise was going to go. Not just Spider-Man himself, but the entire MCU going forward. This film seemed to imply that there was going to be rather large implications on the grander Marvel Cinematic Universe. To this point, I believe that the Spider-Man films within the MCU have been pretty strong. I believe that they've delivered on telling a good story about Peter Parker, as well as developing Spider-Man as a hero. I believe the two always go hand in hand and are always conflicted with one another, and that balance has been struck very harmoniously throughout the first two films. And the question is this third film going to be able to ramp it up? We've seen Tom Holland play Peter Parker before, and he does a good job both as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. But I believe that this is a movie that has a great responsibility before it. To this point, we really haven't seen the film or the hero before us who we think can replace Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., or Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans. They were gigantic heroes and very, very popular. And so the question I had going into No Way Home is this film going to be able to prove that they can continue to do it and deliver strong movies without those two heroes carrying the franchise? And I think people are going to be pretty pleased with what they see. The first thing I want to say is how I'll be approaching this review. I'm going to give a general overview of the plot and a recommendation on whether or not it's worth going to see. I'll do a deeper story analysis, which will contain spoilers, which I'll give a warning ahead of time, and then after my analysis, I'll give a final score out of 10 and my concluding thoughts to how I got there. Well, the way that I would describe No Way Home is it is a story that constantly is Peter Parker dealing with the unintended consequences of well-intentioned actions, and he's constantly having to deal with the collateral damage that he brings on himself. The current situation that he finds himself in is that the world now knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he has to do whatever he can to protect his family and his friends from the possible implications of what that might mean for them. He reaches his boiling point when there's really, really huge implications on his friends and their futures, and so he does what any good friend would do. He goes and sees the wizard that he knows that could possibly cast a spell in order to fix things. And while most of us don't have the ability to go to someone like Dr. Stephen Strange and see if they can make everybody forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, this is something that you have the privilege to do when you're part of the team that saved the universe. So Peter and Dr. Strange make an agreement that he is going to do this spell, but while doing the spell, Peter Parker can't decide who he wants to remember that he's Spider-Man, and as the list gets longer and he is interfering with the magic, something starts to go terribly, terribly wrong. Stephen Strange feels that something has gone wrong with the spell, but can't quite be sure what it is, but knows that it caused a whole lot of trouble, and so he stops casting it, puts it in a box, and says he's going to deal with it later. And we find out very quickly that as Peter is still on his journey to fix the mistake that he has made, causing his friends all this trouble, that this has caused a huge rift between universes. Villains that we are familiar with from Spider-Man movies past, such as Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and Sandman, start to appear within the MCU. See, now these guys come from a different universe. There is now a fracture in the universes, hinting at the reality of a multiverse. And while it is a lot of fun to see Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and Electro come back and reprise their roles as these villains, I think that there are times when the film struggles to balance all of the villains that are appearing on screen in really narrowing down what the major threat is within this film. However, I do think they continue on with the theme of unintended consequences for well-intentioned actions for Peter Parker, and that's his massive obstacle that he has to get over, is he has to decide whether or not he's going to be the hero that decides to make sacrifices, or if he's going to try to continue to have it all. because as he finds out through his journey, trying to have it all is a really impossible task. I believe that Spider-Man No Way Home does a good job of telling this tale. There are times where the script is a little clunky, and I think that the first act feels a little bit more chaotic than an actual proper setup, but by the time we get to the end of the first act, the film really ramps up, it seems to decide where it really wants to go, and is a pretty fun ride. What is surprising about No Way Home is that there's actually some pretty strong emotional moments within this movie, and I think that it's a stronger film when it leans into those more dramatic emotions than the humor, which was a really nice and refreshing thing. When we are used to having humor and lighthearted storytelling and being able to tonally shift to something more dramatic and emotional and have it not feel completely out of place is definitely a strong thing. I do absolutely recommend taking some time to go see Spider-Man No Way Home this holiday season if you can get to see it in theaters. It's a lot of fun, it's definitely worth your time, and the most exciting MCU movie to come out since Far From Home. At this point, I am going to get into my more in-depth story analysis, pointing out more of the better strengths and the weaker weaknesses of this film. It will contain spoilers, and I'm going to give a countdown when spoilers are going to begin. So if you would like to fast forward to my conclusion and my score out of 10, you can check it in the timestamps, but spoilers are going to begin in 3, 2, 1. All right, the first thing that I'm going to address within story analysis is the weaknesses of the film, and then we'll move to the strengths and we'll end on a stronger note. But the first thing that I do want to mention is that the wide cast of villains, for me, I don't know if it necessarily worked within this film as strongly as I would have liked for it to. It felt like having an ensemble of villains never really let the motivations of the bad guys become clear. We were asked to sympathize with the villains because we do want them to be redeemed. That's one of the nice things about this story, is that Peter doesn't just want to send the villains back to their homes where their destiny is going to be death, but rather that he wants to find a way to be able to help him. This does lead to Peter Parker being betrayed by these villains and putting himself in a terrible situation, which leads to the death of Aunt May. And while I do think that the emotional side of this story is very good, I think it would have been nice to at least lean into one of the villains' motivations more clearly. Why do they really want to continue to do bad things after they've jumped into a different universe? Why do they want to continue to be bad guys? Why do they want to be evil within this new space? Make it make sense, make it a little more clear. And the one who I actually thought made the most sense along the way was Electro. His desire for the power and having the arc reactor actually did make sense for his character, but I would have liked to have seen that either as an entire team or maybe lean into it with a couple of other villains. Now, I do think that that's being a little bit nitpicky, but that is one way I think the film could have been improved. Even though the conflict isn't necessarily entire the villain's motivations versus Peter Parker, it's more dealing with the chaos of the multiverse being opened up, I would have just liked to have seen better justice done. Another critique that I had for the film is I'm not so sure I agree with the fact that things would get quite as out of control as they did for Peter and Happy especially. Now, I might not be familiar with all things going on in the MCU, and I might have missed something along the way. It was a little hard for me to believe that Peter Parker was crying the name of Nick Fury when he was begging for some type of consultation, and not having anybody else who could vouch for him or stand up for him. And honestly, I do. I can understand Peter being a little flustered and not being able to think of other people who could be called on. But the one that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me is the fact that Happy kind of just goes with the flow in this. How is he not wanting to contact Pepper Potts to be able to have somebody vouch for him? She is the wife of the person who literally saved the world that they are living in. She can vouch for him. She still has to have ties to Stark Industries. I'm not sure if they they fully developed how that whole thing went, but it's just hard for me to think that there wasn't any other way that they could get out of Dodge. But honestly, the reality in this movie is that the strengths far outweigh the weaknesses, and there's a lot of good things here. And so the minor nitpicks that I have, I can absolutely let those go, enjoy the ride, and look at the film for the strengths that it does have. And I'm going to start off by saying I believe that this movie dealt with Peter Parker's need to grow up and the death of Aunt May and the emotional turn in a very strong way, really embracing the reality that Peter Parker is an absolute broken individual as he is still trying to persevere, continue, and do the right thing. He still does not want these men to die and be thrown back to their home worlds and just be subject to death. He wants to give them another chance. He wants to continue to be the person that he knows he is, true to himself, and really embraces that with great power comes great responsibility. And I do like how they had Aunt May deliver this line within this film. I think the thing that is this film's greatest strength is the fact that it allows Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield to have the conclusion to their stories as Spider-Man that they really deserved. Spider-Man 3 was an absolute joke of a film and totally embarrassing to have such a great film franchise go out in the way that it did. And I think Andrew Garfield playing Spider-Man just got a film franchise cut short when there were more movies planned. They just didn't happen because the second one just didn't really stick with a lot of people. However, we're given the opportunity in No Way Home to see these more mature, grown-up, and developed heroes be able to come into a new universe and mentor and guide and be there for Peter Parker as he's going through the hardest days of his life. It's a very great ending, a great conclusion to these heroes, and a great next step for the MCU's Peter Parker. Now, I think the grander implications of this story are going to be very interesting going forward. Nobody in the world who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man has knowledge to this anymore. Not his closest friends, not Happy, nobody. So now his anonymity is back, but with that comes somewhat of a reset for Peter Parker. And I think this is going to have huge implications on where the MCU goes in the future. There is potential that Spider-Man could be this unifying figure like an Iron Man or a Captain America bringing together some type of Avengers teams. Or with this reset in Peter Parker's life, we could be seeing potential that Spider-Man gets back to small stories of heroism within the city of New York. Either way, I'm very excited and intrigued to see where it goes, and just glad that Tom Holland signed on for more Spider-Man movies. In conclusion, I believe that No Way Home is a responsibility fulfilled. A responsibility fulfilled to longtime MCU fans who have seen numerous of these superhero films, asking the question, is this franchise still alive? Do they still have it at Marvel Studios? And I believe that No Way Home gives us a resounding yes. Yes, they do. And we can get excited anytime we see Spider-Man on screen. They're going to deliver good stories. They're going to be wrestling with how does a hero deal with having a personal life. These are the important tales of Peter Parker, the important tales of Spider-Man. I look forward to the stories that are to come. I think that they're always going to be good, and the more stuff that you can put Spider-Man in, the better the MCU will be. I do think that this movie runs a little bit long, but I'd rather it be long and give everybody a chance to have their time in the sun in this film than feel like it was cut short. Overall, this was a fantastic movie. I thought it was great. I give it an 8 out of 10 and recommend you to absolutely go see it this holiday season. I hope that you all have a fantastic day. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to hear more reviews and all the other things we do here at Steel Lake Studio, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of plans for the future and look forward to continuing to grow this community as we talk about the stories we love. love. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.